Come.
Don't worry, the lights will come on. All right, everybody, welcome back. The Bitcoin Plus Plus Conference News Desk live feed, and joining me now is Love, or you people on Twitter, fellow plebs on Twitter may know him as Rosbeef. Dude, it's a huge honor for me to get to sit down with you and have this talk. So unfortunately for you, I'm a fanboy, so it's gonna get weird, but that's okay.
And it's all good, man. You're happy to be here. It's a dope conference. I'm awesome. Well, actually, I actually went to high school in Dallas, so like I'm familiar with just like area.
Yeah. Cool. Well, look, let's dive into it. Like, okay, we're gonna back up. I guess we'll start first with what do you do at Lightning Labs, and then we'll dive into what your talk is about here today.
Yeah, so I'm the co-founder and CEO of Lightning Labs, and that means like I do a lot of stuff, particularly over the years, including development, architecture stuff, product stuff, including technical vision and things like that. So I think as a founder early on, like basically to do like whatever is needed to continue to get things going, basically. And over time, I am aware like Wes has now hired other individuals as manager who do recruiting, other like engineers senior that do lots of the tech. So now these days probably focus primarily on sort of like architecture, sort of coding, and then kind of like higher level and technical strategy along.
Oh wow, that's absolutely awesome. Okay, and, like so much. I remember, I forget who it was that told me, they were like, when you speak to him, you're gonna see he speaks so fast, and I'm like, nah, I don't. Yeah, that's pretty fast.
Well, yeah,
okay,
I actually went to bed pretty late last night, so I'm tired. So
wait, this is tired. We're getting tired. All right. Oh gosh.
Sleep last night. I'll probably take a nap later or something.
So what's so tell us this. What is your talk going to be about? I mean, first of all, did you already do your talk? Because I'm just out here. I'm on the outskirts.
Yeah, so I did a little bit earlier.
Okay, cool.
I think it was like 11:30 or so. But yeah, so the talk was sort of like about like validating meta protocols on the internet, right?
Okay.
What I mean by that, for example, so define like you may have a protocol that submits some data onto the chain, maybe it's explicit or implicit, basically. Some of them do like a return thing, which is like very wasteful and very identifiable. Like ours actually just like commit something in a publicly. So rather than it being directly in the chain, it's normal transactions. I think that's a much better mechanism because then
it sounds like privacy.
Yeah, exactly. It's more private. You're not putting extra data into the chain itself. It's also not obvious, right? So in the future, people could say, "Oh, we're going to this and this transaction." It looks like a regular transaction. It also uses all type of use now as well. So I think it looks like a simple key. But underneath, if you have some additional solution like proof data, basically, you can verify the proof and say, "Oh, that's actually this particular thing. That's actually like a signed get tag of blah blah blah." So the talk was about sort of like adding in covenants, with sort of like the ability to sort of like introspect into the environment of Bitcoin. Typically, you just have sort of like what's being signed, and you can't say, okay, well, what's this option? Right. So the thing is like you're using some of that stuff over tools to create that. Can you sort of like validate that within Bitcoin? And if you can then maybe have additional protocols that add more scalability to them. Right? So you can basically join another layer, something called Kubernetes, basically, that lets you sort of like move funds on this off-chain layer, basically, either on Bitcoin, but then once you come back to Bitcoin, it's all the same. And similarly, this is like the one transaction. Right. So that's talked about. Applications of like zero-knowledge technology, like things like Starks basically onto the system, because it means rather than like validating all those tests, basically okay, well this is here, the app is something like that as well. I can basically just give you a proof, right? And that proof actually operates recursively, so basically it's dependent on the existence of a prior valid proof over the entire blockchain space to prove that this thing is valid. Which is a really cool thing because this lets you sort of like deploy really cool things like Starks and Starks without software, right? Because generally like
Interesting.
Yeah, because the field is still moving pretty quickly. So maybe every 6 to 9 months, there's like an entirely new proof system that has maybe some new math, needs to be valid, things like that. So I think it's still too early to say, okay, well, which one are we going to have? Because I think it's still moving very, very quickly. For example, things like ECSA, they haven't changed for 30 years. That's very, this dry bone, people can do that. All these structures are still changing. There's a lot of innovation. So I think this lets basically experiment with that innovation off chain without committing to doing it on Bitcoin. So I think eventually it'll be on Bitcoin because like it's sort of like what people wanted from the get-go.
So is this, and again, it's my limited understanding. So what you're talking about, this aspect of privacy, is this, does this come as a result of implementing CTV? Like I'm just trying to figure out, or is it part of CTV, or first CTV must be implemented?
Really good question. So like the talk sort of had like 2 halves, right? The first half was sort of like talking about this path of like using sort of like zero-knowledge proofs and systems basically to optimize when we can validate the stuff on chain, right? So basically, you basically have one commitment in a output somewhere, basically, and then you have a proof that validates to say, well, that thing is valid and follow the rules and so forth and so forth, right? There was another direction, so okay, well, let's say like we wanted to do it within Bitcoin script using covenants and things like that, right? So one of some of the ones I talked about in the talk, we called OpCat. for example, because the Merkle trees are everyone. Bitcoin, and there's like a block that has a Merkle tree. And so our protocol type of assets also has a tree, right? If you have a cat, well, validating a Merkle tree is basically concatenate two elements, SHA-256, concatenate SHA-256. So that's really cool because then you can validate a Merkle proof. You can validate a Merkle proof. I can validate a block header and prove that a block header had some certain transaction embedded in it, basically, which is really cool because now you can basically prove that something existed at some point in the past, and then I can go a little bit further and say, well, that taproot key actually had these scripts, right? And this script is actually a special thing that represents maybe an asset or a stable coin, something like that itself, and that's just itself, right? So other things that are useful is something called contract verify, which is basically a way to, I think someone talked about it earlier, way to verify that certain data was committed to in an output, basically.
Yeah.
And I talked about some additional extensions. Oh, actually, Brian's here.
Oh,
That's him right there.
Okay.
The shorts.
Okay.
Well,
all right. Well,
we can talk about that stuff maybe. But yeah, and so, but I think generally other stuff like that too is helpful. Something like CTV can be useful just to like lower coordination. And
Yeah.
I just talk about sort of like the composition of things like something we call a pocket universe, which is sort of like a commit chain type construct alongside.
hold on a second. Somebody turned off the.
Oh, have we been silent the whole time?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh,
Oh wow. Hold on a
so
second.
we got lights and we lost sound.
I don't know. Somebody unplugged the thing, or
No, I can see it here. Or is that?
I just turned it off.
Ah.
Yeah. Hold on a second. Oh wow. Okay, guys, sorry about that. We just saw some power go. You can hear. Okay, you can hear us.
All right,
Thank you so much. Okay. Yeah, we just lost video. Okay, cool.
All right, it's us.
All right, thank you guys. We apologize. Stuff is like a moving thing, and Walton's changing stuff. I apologize.
No
Let's
problem.
continue.
What I was saying was that, like, if you combine this concept with things like our, channel factories, things like that as well too, you basically gain the ability to sort of like, join Lightning off chain because we know sometimes like onboarding can be a little difficult because someone basically needs to make an on transaction to onboard and make it lose transaction fees, maybe the fees are high. But I'm working on technology basically that allow you to sort of like join off chain in a secure manner. So basically, I can join the sort of like tree of channels off chain, and maybe there's one transaction that lets 1,000 people onboard Lightning itself, which dramatically lowers the onboarding cost. And also, once you're inside this sort of like factory type construct, you can reallocate liquidity on the fly off chain, right? So all of a sudden now, I'm not like bound to a particular connection. I can maybe have additional channels be created basically, and you end up sort of like pooling the funds more directly rather than like having it be more directed. So in my mind, like I think sometimes people like they see new technology come up and they think, oh well, this is the block, this thing's gonna replace Bob. And me, I'm like, no. Like how can we compose all this together? Because with Bitcoin the way it is, like it's programmable money basically. Anytime you get a new technology, you're not gonna say it's gonna replace it. You can say, oh, we can combine this with this and this, and then make this. And that's something I was like, how can we combine the things? Maybe something like how can I take sort of like the unique innovation in that? Maybe I don't need the entire thing. I take just the connector. I take one little thing there to combine it to make something that's really cool.
Okay, so let me ask you this then. I guess, do you, because this is something I always talk about, essentially, have you found scenarios in which this can somehow be like hacked, can somehow essentially be broken?
No,
right? Like,
yeah.
because it does sound complex, and because for me, like, the second I hear off chain, I immediately I'm like, okay, well, so that means there's a rift there that can occur. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, the important thing, you always need to make sure like you're saying that you can get back to the chain, right? So anything that I work on, like it always must have, my opinion, like unilateral exits. So sometimes you see a bunch of these new L2s or whatever else that multi-sig, right? And that, like, if I wanted to get my funds back, I would have to ask somebody, and they could say no.
Yes.
And at that point, it's like, well, that's not Bitcoin. That's like a multi-sig. I could might as well be using some other sort of laws at that point because it effectively is, right? So, so anything that I work on, I think it's important that you always able to basically just broadcast and like. So this is sort of like what they call like a force close on Lightning, basically. I think you need that ability to just exit unilaterally because otherwise, like, you'll interrupt your relationship, right? But in our case, for example, the way term assets work is that like you're committing to some metadata in a Bitcoin output, right? So therefore, like, you're basically relying on security of Bitcoin itself. If someone can't spend your top level Bitcoin output, where they can't move your funds or your assets or anything like that, because now we're basically reliant on the backbone security of Bitcoin itself, right? We are right that there are other considerations because you have those off-chain communication, things like that. One other thing I've been looking into is sort of like using some what they call like lightweight formal methods to basically create a specification and try to prove properties of the protocol beforehand, maybe before you do even implementation, right? So this is something they do in like things like distributed systems, CPUs, microcontrollers, things like that as well. Basically, can you have like an abstract model and then prove certain, or maybe assert certain capabilities or aspects of that model basically before implementing? But you're right, like you always need to be careful with this stuff. And I think as long as like the one thing is like if you can unilaterally get your money back, then that's cool, right? Because then you can just exit. But if you can't, then that's very problematic, basically. And I would definitely be wary of any protocol that is advertising it as like an L2 or something like that, where you can't unilaterally get your funds back, because that's a problematic area.
I tweeted a few weeks ago that to me, what I understand by a real layer 2 is something that unilaterally settles to the main chain. So to me, there are only two: Lightning and Mercury. Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah. I mean, right, and I think that's like a a key requirement basically, because if you can't get back like you can be held hostage, basically, right? I think the cool thing is like, if all of these components have the ability to get back to the main chain, then you can compose them all together, right? For example, I could send an HTLC from one thing to another. I can do swap from one thing to another, basically. Then you have this really cool off-chain network where Lightning is basically bridging all of these other technologies together.
I talked a little bit to someone from Bolts at this conference. I'm intrigued why there aren't more services like Bolts that are doing trustless swaps between Lightning and Bitcoin. It seems like there's a real market there.
Yeah, no, I mean, super good question. So we have something called Lightning Loop as well, which is like a
I've used it.
Yeah. Similar thing. Exactly why the gap is there. Like, hey, I guess it's to our benefit. They're not, really like realizing the opportunity. I will say though that like I think doing it at scale and doing it in a manner that is also resistant to chain fees like does take some engineering work. You basically need to do like the estimation effectively, batching, things like that as well. And some of them like maybe they come up. There's some wallets that maybe they just shut down when the fees are too high, basically, right? But I think you basically need to do the upfront work to make sure that the pricing and everything is correct, so that you can basically continue to operate in a high fee environment, because you have like number one, like you have like a enough density of the user base to ensure that like you have sort of like scale, and you have economies of scale basically in the system itself. But otherwise, I think it's amazing, and I think it's really cool because that also gives you a way to interact with the main chain from Lightning, or the other way around, right? So for example, let's say someone only accepted Bitcoin on chain, where I can use something like loop out basically to swap for the Bitcoin on chain and then send to them. And so that's something that I think is really cool. And like you're saying, assuming there are other sidechains in the future that actually do have that trustless exit, you can also use this to connect them as well too, where I can basically go on some sidechain, do the HTLC, get it on Lightning, basically move funds in and out, basically. And then once again, you basically have Lightning as this networking, monetary networking layer between all these other layers, which I think is really where it shines.
Yeah, I see it as you can receive funds on Lightning as a merchant, or even if you're withdrawing from exchange over Lightning, and then when you feel like you've got slightly more on Lightning than you feel comfortable with, then you flip some on chain, for example, using Bolt or let's say Loop.
You basically like flush out to cold storage on the fly, which is cool, because then that way you basically minimize what's actually hot in your wallet. So maybe at the end of the day, similar to someone like sitting the
privacy benefits there maybe as well.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, similar to like opening like a Lightning channel, as well. But yeah, it's sort of like taking the cash and register into the safe at the end of the day, basically.
Yeah.
And then at that point, you're ready to add more cash in there as like a sort of like analogy there. But yeah, I mean, I think definitely people should focus on like how can all these things compose together, rather than like trying to like think of it as being zero sum. Like Arc doesn't kill Lightning, but it could be Arc. You can use Lightning within them, right? Things like that. Channel factories are also another component that basically goes to these things. So, we shouldn't have a zero-sum attitude with technology, because it's all additive, basically. Look at all the gear that we have here, right? Like things that replace each other. Like, oh, the browser, now we can make it an application, we can do WebRTC, we can do and so on. And that's how, things move forward as far as technological progress.
I have one tough question for you about interoperability. When Bolt 12, have Lightning Labs been distracted with other projects when Bolt 12?
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, like, we led the development of Taproot channels, which we have now, and I did a demo a little bit earlier today. It's showing like Taproot assets in Taproot channels as well. We're working on the gossip layer as well, which is needed in order to actually gossip in Taproot channels, and then also PTLCs on top of that. But then as far as that, like, Bolt 12 is many things. You can say like there's like the invoice format, there's blinded paths, there's the offer protocol, and also there's onion messaging as well. So there's quite a few layers there. And so we were trying to focus initially on blinded paths, basically, which is the added privacy benefit of Lightning, where like now you can now the receiver basically gives you sort of like an introduction point, and then you have some additional hops there to actually have that there. So in our new release, which is in RC right now, LND 0.18, we'll have blinded paths forward and support there, which is a big enabler, basically, and will also let us kind of like tune the new technology itself, because it is something entirely new. Maybe there's additional things that you don't have to do effectively, right? Because all of a sudden, like for typically whenever you have an invoice, like it's just an invoice. Right?
Is that what enables reusable Lightning invoices? Like paths or not quite?
That's part of it, right? So the invoices are fetched using any messaging, which uses blinded paths, right? And so now this is what it allows you not necessarily to give away like your node directly in the network itself, because you have this sort of like, blinded path to that node itself. And then this is also going to be in the invoices as well. So you can say it's a fundamental component of, Goal 12. And so we're going to like start here, get this thing nice and solid, basically figure out all the edge cases, and then move on to the other stuff as well. And, doing this, because LND does have a lot of many routing nodes used in LND itself, this also unlocks, the deployment, because it's similar to something like, whenever they talk about IPv4, IPv6, right? Because of like an internal network change, you needed everyone to upgrade. And it took a little bit of time. Once we got there, it's like, oh, hey, IP address for everybody, basically. And I think it's something similar, right? There's certain parts of it that are just end to end. For example, maybe the invoice will have to change, but because you require that update, it's going to take a little bit longer, but we're heading there, and it's going to be doable.
So approximate timeline, do you think that because I'm just trying to figure out like what does this mean for a retail user? Because you're talking about the Taproot assets, and I'm just thinking like, okay, what does this mean for the retail user in Bitcoin and Lightning, and when can they actually expect to see, I imagine, some product development based on this implementation or these implementations?
Yeah, super good question. So, earlier today I did like the first, mainnet Taproot asset channel and did like a key set between two nodes, which is a really big milestone, because and the cool thing about that, because everything is verifiable, you can see the ATX ID, and as I mentioned, like with the way the protocol works, it only commits some information in a public key. So it's not like an op return, which is like clogging the chain, something like that itself. You can then also like I linked to even like an SPV proof that shows that's there, and you can verify all that within itself. But as far as like the impact of the user, I think like I think it'd be dope for people in countries where maybe like stablecoins maybe are sort of like their lifeblood now, right? For example, certain parts of South America, certain parts of Africa, elsewhere, and this is really cool because up until now it's all been another change. It's on Tron, it's on Ethereum, it's on all these
Tony Klaus's work with stable channels.
Sorry,
you seen Tony Klaus's work with stable channels?
Yeah. So that's a little bit different in that like that sort of like requires two. I mean, so I think that's good for like maybe like a B2B account kind of a thing, right? A joint account, because that requires two parties to be online to be continuously updating the state basically. And if you don't update the state and the price is moving, well, you have like an unrealized exposure basically there, right? Versus like it being something that represents that value that's on your phone, they can go offline. So I think it's complementary. I think that would work better in like you're saying like a B2B joint account basically, where maybe like we're making payments between each other very frequently. We want to denominate it in USD perhaps, and we'll use that. But this I think is more suited for people around the world that maybe are going to be on mobile phones as well. And the cool thing with it is like, so for example, with the way the protocol works, like all the invoices will be in Bitcoin, right? So you'll give me another invoice, I'll pay the invoice, right? But maybe at the last hop, it actually goes over a USD stable channel and they can receive whatever they want to. And I don't even need to know what they're receiving. And then similarly, you can give me a Bitcoin invoice, right? And maybe my first hop is actually a stablecoin channel with you. We do that hop, and then boom, it goes over Bitcoin as is, right? So
like strike without strike, essentially.
Well, you can say, yeah, it's sort of like it will give people the capability to make a decentralized or distributed version of that, right? So what I look at is like right now, like the difficulty, the on and off ramps are still very steep in Bitcoin, right? It's hard to get in and out. There's remittances, there's all these other fees. This sort of like makes that a little bit shallower. Where now you can get it out more easily. So you can imagine a wallet, it's a Lightning wallet, and you have a slider. You can move in and out, from Bitcoin to a stablecoin, like that itself, right? And to me, it's like a stepping stone where it's like first you give them the ability to like have that transactional value. It's sort of like fiat front end, Bitcoin back end, you can say, right? Then over time they're like, oh, this stuff is not that great. Like I want this basically, and they start to hold that more and more. So now you have a more gradual approach into the system, and I think bringing a lot of that network effect and excitement to Bitcoin will just continue to grow the network effect itself. And the other cool thing is that because I mentioned like sort of like the whole thing with anti-principle, the routing nodes on the network don't need to upgrade. So over time, once this flips on, they'll just see more activity.
That's all.
Exactly. So as
they're just passing HTLCs.
Yeah. It's just normal Bitcoin, right? So it's basically using the Bitcoin backbone and all the network effects, because we could start an entirely new network, but that's going to take a lot of time to bootstrap. We've got that capital. It's going to be bifurcated basically. But instead, we're able to just use existing Light network. And as I mentioned, like an unupgraded wallet will be able to pay an invoice, and you receive stablecoin at the end. Right, so which is really cool, and everything we mentioned around sort of like things like submarine swaps with Loop and other things like that, they'll be able to adopt this as well. So all of a sudden, I can swap out into whatever asset I want, or the other way around, which would be really cool.
So recently, there's been an increase in crackdown on unregistered money transmitters. Do you think that I have issues with the term stable coin anyway, but do you think putting stable coins on Lightning actually brings a lot more regulatory risk to Bitcoin, to Lightning?
Well, I mean, I think what I can say is like for the past 10 years, I think, FinCEN has had some guidelines basically that state that like, hey, if you have something that isn't fully custodial basically and say multi-sig where you can unilaterally exit, that is fine. And that's not, something that requires, these MSB licenses like that, right? But I think it's always like governments like to, play with their leverage and maybe scare people and things like that as well. But I think at the end of the day, like, what you need are just clear guidelines for that. And you can't necessarily, I mean, I think it's very much a mistake to like, issue guidelines via enforcement basically, which is like what the SEC and stuff like to do. It's like, well, you just need to know the law, what the law is to follow it before you can actually do it, right? So, so I think what'll happen with this stuff, I think like over time, like people will just challenge this stuff, right? Over time, governments overstep, executive, branch oversteps basically, and that's why we have the judicial system basically to step in and then adjudicate and say, hey, no, this is what's actually going on here. And you see sometimes even the SEC goes to court and they end up losing, right? Because the judge is like, you guys didn't do all of this stuff. These are very bad arguments and so forth, right? So I think, it's something where, we continue to make these technologies, these freedom-enhanced technologies, because this is something that's going to improve people's lives around the world. I think on the other end, those that, have the capability and the know-how can also fight the other end, from the legal system as well, too. So, and at the end of the day, more clarity is better for other individuals. And at the end of the day, stuff's all non-custodial. People are running the software themselves, too. And, there are restrictions around the world as well. So,
do you foresee a future where some routing node runners or other people who are active on the Lightning Network actually getting money transmitter licenses?
Well, you can say some big companies already have it, right? So for example,
ZBD is a prime example,
people like Square or ZBD or even Coinbase now, I mean, so they have these licenses themselves, and maybe they'll have a different way of like approaching the way they open interact with channels. Basically, maybe they'll have like certain liquidity partners that then are basically the bridge into the network, but you can still pay them. Maybe you can't just have something direct open with them. But so I think like, we'll see how the space evolves. I think at the end of the day, it's all open source, it's all non-custodial, it's all, freedom and technology. So we'll see sort of like exactly how that landscape develops. And, I think it's easy to like get scared and speculate and things like that, but we can also just like, follow the course and know that like, we have these guidelines that have been published for over 10 years now, basically. And these are things that actually potentially improve people's lives as well. So.
How much of working with policymakers is about education? To me, it's perhaps slightly alarming, but also not very surprising that they consider a money transmitter to be anything that conducts the money. Let's say.
And I think that's the thing, right? That was like a weird argument, right? It's like, because if you say,
it's petty, right? To say, okay, well, a pan can conduct heat to water, so it's an energy transmitter.
I think it also can be very, reductionist as well, right?
Absolutely.
Well, what platform? I'm running
Isn't that the law? Isn't that the law though? In general,
AWS nowadays, right? So
all transmitting money.
Yeah, exactly, right. So I think it's a nonsensical thing. It's even like the reduction of absurdity in argument.
Is the state always sensible? It's not.
Well, but I think that's where the legislature and justice system comes in basically, where okay, well, that's actually not constitutional, right? And I think that it's going to get there eventually, basically, right? And I think until it gets to that level, there will be uncertainty. Once it gets there, it's like, oh well, this is protected by these amendments, basically, and then people will have all this clarity. So
I'm with Beauty on the opinion that kind of all of this should be fought on the First Amendment, right? Because it's Bitcoin is speech. You reference all these amendments. Which one do you think these things should be fought on?
I mean, you can say it's part of like speech, part of privacy. Maybe even there's some aspects like the Fifth Amendment as well, because I think some of the arguments are like, oh well, because you could do something to add a backdoor and you did, you're liable. Like that's like, well, like that's a very like we're secure argument. But I think we'll just see sort of like where it goes, and I think people can just rely on just sort of like the past guys that we have, just knowing that like this technology is like a tool for good, actually, basically. And similarly, like you're seeing in other places, like maybe like the UK, the EU, where they're trying to have them, even ban things like WhatsApp or Signal, right? So like all of this is related. So you can't, privately message
end-to-end encryption.
Exactly, and I can't message them, and you want a backdoor and all that stuff. That's just infringing on people's, rights, basically. And the reason why they don't like this stuff as well, because they want the negative interest rates. They want to basically lock into your bank account. They don't want you to withdraw your cash, right? These are all things that people can use to enhance their own freedom, which I think is, very important, and things that like are worth fighting for. So.
Lalo, I just want to thank you very much for joining us on Good Morning Bitcoin Plus Club Underground
Cool.
collaborations.
Yeah.
Absolutely awesome. Ben.
Yeah, definitely keep watching
Really
the live.
appreciate what you're doing in this
Yeah,
space.
no problem. Keep watching the live stream, people that are watching on there, and also there's live stream of the conference as well. That y'all can check
There
out.
is indeed, yeah,
So it's all good.
main stage and of course the workshops.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Take it easy.